Now, later this afternoon in Barbados, our old friend and colleague Tony Cozier will be laid to rest. Tony's broadcasting career on both radio and television spanned 50 years. His last commentary was on Test Match Special last year when England toured the West Indies. Tony was the son of a journalist, a keen club cricketer, a man who enjoyed life to the full when the sun went down, and whose distinctive Bayesian accent made his cricket commentary sing.
Here comes Garner on the way now to Broad, and Broad edges, he's out, caught, a third slip by Harper. Now, is Marshall going to come out? Well, they're waiting. Yes, he looks as if he is going to come out. In fact, everybody was walking off. He's out, caught and bowled by Holding. The bowler had no business getting across there to take that catch, and yet somehow he managed to.
I like any sort of cricket. I can go on the beach and watch fellas play. Once you're male and you're from Barbados and you're of my vintage, you are expected to love the game with a passion, and I think that you'll find that.
Here is Sawan, goes back and chops it into his stumps. He's bowled. Well, the pressure is told, and England get another wicket. The West Indies 235 now for 4.
Alan McGilvray taught me a lot about the technique of commentary. He came here in 1965 with Australia, and that was my first time doing commentary on an entire series. So he taught me all sorts of techniques about commentary.
And that's in the air, it's over the top, and let's see if it'll hit in the turf and go all the way. Yes, it does. So Boycott lifting it over the top. Perhaps he didn't get hold of it quite as well as he wanted, but that was enough.
I'll give you one example where a bowler is running up, and you hear a number of commentators will say he's on his way and he bowls.
Yes.
McGilvray said, why do you say he's bowling? Why he bowls? Because that's what he's going to do. And you're wasting that fraction of a second where you say he bowls and it's with the batsman already. So just say he's on his way and then transfer your attention to the batsman.
Here's Powell into Cook, and Cook is hammering it down. He's out caught at backward point. A low catch, well taken by Smith. Cut away, inches from the ground. Smith went down and took it as casual and as easy as you like.
And here is Cook now to Dujon, who sweeps down towards deep backward square. This could be a century. That's it, 4 runs. Jeffrey Dujon has got a century. His first against England, his first in England. Raises the bat above his shoulder. Is congratulated by Gordon Greenidge.
Mascarenas on the way again to Samuels, and Samuels hits it high in the air. This is going to go back, 6. Lucky that airliner which is coming in now wasn't in the path when that ball went up.
For listening, as I did when I was at school, you couldn't beat John Arlott. I mean, everyone at school wanted to be John Arlott. Brian Johnston made Test Match Special with his personality. It came through his personality, came through on Test Match Special.
Richards is dropped on the pad. There's an appeal. He's out leg before. Richards out leg before wicket. Agnew strikes. He's got his second wicket, and what wickets? Greenidge first, and now Richards leg before shuffling across his stumps. The West Indies are 69 for 3. Botham drives into the gully. Brilliantly caught by Garner. Magnificent catch by Garner. Marshall troops back to his mark at that far end. This angled approach, a few little stuttering steps before breaking into his quick run-up to Willis, and Willis is bowled. That's the end of the innings. England all out for 286. Willis bowled by Marshall for 2.
Last ball of the over, 136 for 4. West Indies 56 needed now, as Bravo waits now and is right in behind it. Anderson around the wicket. End of the over. I think that will be my last stint on the day, and probably for the match. And thank you. Cheers.
And yes, those were Tony's last words at a cricket match. The last test he covered, it was last year, as the West Indies completed their victory over England in Barbados. Well, later we're going to hear from Michael Holding, a man who knew Tony as well as anyone, and his friends here in the TMS box will share their memories. But first, the man whose job it was to be Tony's producer for many of those 50 years, Peter Baxter. I asked him if he remembered their first meeting.
Funnily enough, I don't actually remember. It must have been late 60s, I suppose. He worked, his first test match on TMS was the test match before I first went into the Test Match Special box in 1966. He may have been there at the Oval on that occasion, but Roy Lawrence was back in the chair for the West Indies. And I sort of became aware of Tony being around, but I'd certainly heard his voice before I met the man.
Yeah, but I mean, you saying that actually is an illustration of just how long, how many years Tony was doing this for.
Yes, thanks. Yes, he was over 50 years in the saddle. It's amazing, isn't it?
It is absolutely extraordinary.
In fact, he'd made his debut the year before in the West Indies, when, of course, Johners set him up magnificently in Trinidad with one of Johners' favourite oldest gags, where he was doing something. He saw Tony returning to the box when they weren't on the air, but he pretended they were. Asked him a difficult question about statistics and ages of the West Indies players and all the rest of it, and tried to push him along, and Tony floundered along before Johners revealed to him that they weren't on the air at all.
It was very cruel. You've worked with so many commentators through the years. I wonder what it was that made Tony special as far as you were concerned.
He was very detailed, he was very accurate, but with a nice light touch. He was quite serious about his work, wasn't he? I mean, he was a good party animal away from his work, but when he was working, absolutely, and he knew everything, absolutely everything. He'd read everything, he'd heard any number of programs that were on at the same time. I don't know how he did it, but he was so well informed about everything, and so you could ask him any question, certainly about any West Indian player. He'd know all about his background.
Yes, for someone, as you said, who did enjoy life to the full,
Yes.
he was also a traditionalist. As
very
far
much
as
so.
dress codes were concerned, but also the discipline of commentary, I always felt. And I remember him talking to me when I first met him in 1991 for my first game with him, talking about actually the basic nuts and bolts of commentary. You know,
Yes.
the bowler comes in, you must say the batsman's name, he plays it out to mid-off, whatever it is, and then it is obviously the recognised way of doing it, but Tony was a real stickler for doing that.
And right up to the moment, so he was with the bowler as he bowled. There was no report. He would never dreamt of talking through a ball or anything like that. He was absolutely right up to it with perfect description. And, he'd been a decent enough cricketer himself to know what he was talking about too.
Yes. What I loved about him too was the sound of real joy in his voice, whether it was just the Bayesian accent. But it almost sang, didn't it? And obviously when West Indies were going well, 1970s and 1980s, you'll recall those tours, I'm sure. I mean, He was more than singing. I mean, he really did enjoy West Indies' performance then.
It was the sort of Barbadian lilt, it's been called, but that really is the word for it. It's a very pleasant accent on the ear. Until, of course, he's talking to another Barbadian. I mean, just talking to his wife or talking to Donna Simmons or something like that. And he became totally incomprehensible because the Bajan, I think, probably is the strongest of all the patois in the West Indies.
What I also really admired about Tony, and you'd have experienced this as well, and in fact at close hand really, was that tightrope that he had to walk in the Caribbean as far as his job was concerned. I mean, the merest criticism of any other country's cricketer other than Barbados, and he would just have everything thrown at him, wouldn't he? I remember a match in Trinidad when he'd been mildly critical of Phil Simmons as a test cricketer, who of course promptly came out and scored a half century, but in a one-day international, which was the point actually that Tony was trying to make. But I remember Queen's Park just reverberated the shouts of Cozier, and he was under the table in the press box. I mean, literally, it was that sort of awful atmosphere, and yet he always sort of carried on very stoically, didn't he? He sort of accepted and recognised the situation.
Yes, I certainly remember that occasion of the Phil Simmons business.
Yes.
But as you say, at every stage, it's extraordinary. And people forget sometimes in this country that the West Indies is a lot of sovereign countries making up the thing, which is what makes their life so difficult. Which means that the great captains have been the ones who managed to get them to play together. I mean, think of Frank Worrell amongst the first, who got them all to play as a unit. But the Frank Worrell was not certainly before his death widely admired in Barbados because he hadn't always favoured Barbadian players.
Yes.
I think you were there for the no come-ins, no go-ins test match. And
yes.
That's what happens. And Tony actually negotiated it remarkably well, all that stuff.
Yes, and there was an incident, wasn't there, involving Chris Martin Jenkins. And the Barbadian umpire, of course.
Yes, Lloyd Barker,
yes.
who'd given Rob Bailey out, caught off his hip down the leg side, and then been charged Viv actually charged at him, and he, after handing the bowler his cap, he rather changed his decision. And CMJ did a piece actually very carefully worded, but of course by the time it came back to Barbados, it was seen as accusing a Barbadian umpire of cheating, and suddenly the storm that brew up. We were sharing commentary on that tour with Voice of Barbados, and we couldn't after that match. We had to do our own thing. It was hastily arranged. No, for the last 2 days of the Test match, we had to do our own commentary, and I obviously approached all the people we'd been working with, and of the Barbadians, only Tony would do it.
Yes. The fun side of Tony, of which there was a huge one.
I know where you're thinking of Concert Bay, aren't you?
I am. That's exactly where I'm going. I mean,
when we can find it.
It's easy to find it now talking about it than ever to find his sort of beach house, which was on Concert Bay on the east side of Barbados. And everyone would strike off in mini mokes and cars on the rest day of a Test match, full of optimism that you'd find this place. It took hours of thrashing through the cane fields, but when you did get there was this lovely rustic, sort of large shed perched on the rocks, overlooking the Atlantic with the waves rolling in, and Tony in his shorts and a t-shirt and a
crates
rum.
of Banks beer, flying fish butties, and
absolutely,
yes, wonderful,
and calypso music.
Yeah, cricket on the beach.
That was Tony.
Yeah, it was. He loved it. He used to go there on more than one occasion. He went there to sort of finish writing a book. And how he did it with the distraction of looking at the view, I don't know. But he could concentrate pretty hard when he needed to, couldn't he?
Yeah, I've got a memory of him dancing on our terrace table outside to calypso music late one night. But that's another story. Where he did feature, although entirely anonymously, of course, but played a very important part, as he would always say and has written, his finest commentary in all those years of 50 years of commentating, his best piece of radio commentary was actually not saying anything at the Oval in 1991.
Yes.
I'm talking about the leg over, which of course primarily featured dear old John and me, and the odd snort from Bill Frindle. However, to my left, Tony sat absolutely silently, but with a microphone in front of him. He could have talked at any moment.
He could. He was sitting and writing his reports up for the Nation, and he didn't. Yes, he wasn't going to go. I did ask him after. I said, "You could have bailed us out then." He said, "Oh no, man." But actually, in a way, that sums him up, because he did. He always refused. You remember when it rained? He was always the first one out of the box. I'm not getting involved, man. You try and get him back. No. He wasn't going to do that. Except I do remember once, many, many years ago, in a rain interval, when he challenged this business of everyone thinking the West Indies is all the same. And he was red hot on the politics of the Caribbean and the history of the politics of the Caribbean. So he did a bit of that, and he demonstrated the different accents of the different islands, hitting it absolutely spot on, all of them. And it was a brilliant piece. He just went round all the different accents of the islands.
For me, he must be the most complete cricket reporter stroke commentator stroke journalist, because he did everything, didn't he? But everything at that level. Television, we're both radio people, but he commentated on TV ball by ball. I'm not talking about the stuff with just the colour stuff, but proper ball by ball commentary for half an hour, and then we'll walk straight through into the radio box and do exactly the same, but in an entirely different way, of course, because they're such different disciplines. And I admire him enormously for that.
Yes, I mean, there often, as you say, no gap at all, and I suppose people should understand that the television commentary is more akin to the expert summariser on radio than it is to the ball-by-ball commentator on radio. They're totally different jobs, and he could just switch seamlessly. You'd never notice. You wouldn't even give thought to the fact that he'd made that transition.